The Monaghan textile factory stood like a sentinel on the outskirts of town, its towering smokestacks piercing the sky, a remnant of an era long gone. Built in the early 1900s, it had once been the heart of the community, providing jobs and security to countless families. However, its history was marred by tragedy. A devastating fire in 1923 had claimed the lives of 53 workers, reducing the factory to a smoldering husk and leaving a dark stain on the town's history. For decades, the factory lay abandoned, its charred walls a grim reminder of the disaster. Nature began to reclaim it, vines creeping up the sides and weeds sprouting through cracks in the concrete. Despite its dilapidated state, local legends persisted about ghostly apparitions and strange sounds emanating from within its walls. No one dared to venture inside, and those who did seldom spoke of what they saw. In the spring of 2024, a wealthy investor named Victor Hall purchased the property, determined to restore the factory to its former glory. He envisioned a modern facility that would bring prosperity back to the town. Skeptics scoffed at his ambition, but the promise of jobs and revitalization silenced most of the doubters. Work began in earnest, with crews laboring day and night to repair and update the old factory. By summer, the Monaghan textile factory was once again operational, its machinery humming and clanking as if the past century had never happened. The new workers were a mix of young and old, eager to earn a steady paycheck and curious about the factory's notorious reputation. Tom Edwards was one of the night shift workers, a lanky man in his 30s with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow. He had grown up hearing the stories about the haunted factory. He was skeptical but couldn't deny the chill that ran down his spine the first time he walked through the factory's gates. The air felt heavy, as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. It wasn't long before strange things began to happen. Machines would start on their own, their gears whirring and belts spinning without anyone near them. Tools went missing, only to turn up in the most improbable places. Tom often felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, as if someone was watching him. He shrugged it off, attributing it to the eerie atmosphere of the old building. One night, as Tom was inspecting a particularly finicky loom, he heard a faint whisper. He turned around, expecting to see one of his co-workers, but the room was empty. The whisper came again, this time clearer. "Help us." Tom's heart pounded in his chest. He backed away from the loom, his eyes darting around the room. The whisper grew louder, more insistent. "Help us. Please." He bolted from the room, nearly colliding with Meena Patel, a young seamstress who worked in the next section. "Whoa, Tom! What's the rush?" Meena asked, her eyes wide with surprise. Tom struggled to catch his breath. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "The whispering. Someone was whispering for help." Meena frowned. "I didn't hear anything. Are you sure you're okay?" Tom shook his head, trying to clear the fog of fear. "I swear, someone was in there." Meena glanced over his shoulder into the empty room. "Maybe it's just your imagination. This place can get to you, you know?" Tom nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. As they walked back to their workstations, he noticed a shadow flitting along the walls, disappearing just as quickly as it appeared. He decided not to mention it to Meena. She already thought he was spooked enough. Over the next few weeks, the incidents increased. More workers reported seeing shadows, hearing whispers, and feeling an oppressive presence. Accidents began to happen with alarming frequency. A worker named Joe lost 2 fingers in a freak mishap with a spinning wheel. Another, Sarah, suffered severe burns when a steam pipe inexplicably burst. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed the factory was cursed, haunted by the spirits of those who perished in the fire. Others suggested that the souls of the dead were trying to warn them, to reveal a truth that had been buried for 100 years. Tom couldn't ignore the signs any longer. Determined to uncover the truth, he began researching the factory's history. Late at night, he pored over old newspapers, digging through archives at the local library. The more he read, the more convinced he became that the past was not as distant as it seemed. One evening, he stumbled upon an old photograph. It was taken a week before the fire, showing the workers posing in front of the factory. Tom's blood ran cold when he recognized one of the faces. It was the ghostly figure he had seen lurking in the shadows. As he stared at the photograph, the whisper returned, louder and more desperate than ever. "Help us?" Tom knew then that the echoes of the past were not just memories, they were cries for justice, and until the truth was revealed, the haunting would never cease. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the factory floor. The clang of metal and the hum of machines filled the air as the night shift began. Tom Edwards, still rattled from his research, tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting back to the photograph. The ghostly figure he recognized haunted his thoughts, and the whispers seemed to follow him everywhere. Tonight, the atmosphere in the factory felt particularly oppressive. The air was thick and heavy, as if the building itself was suffocating under the weight of its past. Tom moved cautiously through the maze of machines, his senses on high alert. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. As he checked the looms, he noticed something strange. One of the machines was running, its gears turning and belts spinning, but there was no one operating it. Tom frowned and approached the loom, expecting to find a malfunction, but everything seemed to be in perfect working order. He reached out to shut it off, but before he could touch it, the machine stopped abruptly. Tom's heart pounded in his chest. He looked around, but the factory was eerily silent, the only sound the distant hum of other machines. He backed away slowly, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. Suddenly, a cold draft swept through the room, sending a shiver down his spine. He turned and saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was Mina, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "Tom, did you see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "See what?" Tom asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "The shadows. They're moving," Mina said, pointing towards the far end of the room. Tom followed her gaze and felt his blood run cold. The shadows on the wall seemed to writhe and twist, as if alive. They stretched and elongated, forming grotesque shapes that danced in the dim light. Tom blinked, hoping it was just a trick of the light, but the shadows remained, growing more sinister by the second. "We need to get out of here," Tom said, grabbing Mina's arm. They hurried down the hallway, the shadows following them, growing darker and more oppressive. As they rounded a corner, they nearly collided with Carl, the night shift supervisor. "What's going on?" Carl demanded, his face a mask of irritation. "The shadows. They're moving," Mina stammered. Carl sighed, clearly annoyed. "You two need to stop letting your imaginations get the better of you. There's no such thing as moving shadows." "But we saw them," Tom insisted. "And the machines. They're operating on their own." Carl shook his head. "I don't have time for this nonsense. Get back to work, both of you." Defeated, Tom and Mina returned to their stations, but the sense of unease lingered. Tom couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. He decided to take matters into his own hands and started documenting the strange occurrences. He hoped that by gathering evidence he could convince Carl and the others that they weren't imagining things. As the night wore on, the incidents continued. Tom saw more shadows moving in the corners of his vision, and the whispers grew louder and more insistent. He could feel the factory closing in on him, its walls pulsating with a dark energy. Around midnight, the factory's alarm system blared, piercing the silence with its shrill wail. Tom and Mina rushed to the source of the noise and found Joe, the worker who had lost his fingers, sprawled on the floor, his face contorted in pain. "What happened?" Tom asked, kneeling beside Joe. "The machine just started on its own," Joe gasped. "I tried to stop it, but it was like it had a mind of its own." Tom looked at the machine and saw the same eerie glow that had surrounded the loom earlier. It was as if the factory itself was alive, its machinery possessed by some malevolent force. The workers gathered around, their faces pale with fear. Whispers of the factory's haunted past spread through the crowd, and Tom knew that the situation was spiraling out of control. He needed to find a way to stop whatever was happening before more people got hurt. Determined, he resolved to dig deeper into the factory's history, to uncover the truth behind the whispers and the moving shadows. He was convinced that the past held the key to stopping the haunting, but he had no idea what horrors he would uncover in his quest for answers. As the night shift ended, and the first light of dawn crept through the factory windows, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The Monahan textile factory held many secrets, and the shadows in the machinery were only the beginning. The oppressive atmosphere in the factory grew thicker with each passing night, the whispers louder and the shadows darker. Despite the workers' mounting fears, production continued, driven by the relentless demands of Victor Hall. Tom and Mina's warnings went unheeded, and the accidents became more frequent, each one more bizarre and terrifying than the last. One evening, as Mina worked at her sewing station, she felt a chill sweep through the room. She shivered, rubbing her arms to ward off the cold. The other workers seemed unaffected, their heads down, focused on their tasks. Mina tried to shake off the feeling, but it clung to her like a second skin. She glanced around the room, her eyes scanning the dimly lit space. That's when she saw her. A woman, dressed in a long, soot-stained dress, stood at the far end of the room. Her hair was matted and tangled, her face twisted in an expression of sheer agony. Mina's breath caught in her throat as she locked eyes with the apparition. The woman's eyes were hollow, dark pits that seemed to suck in the light. Mina blinked, and the ghostly figure vanished, leaving only the memory of her pain-filled eyes. She stumbled back, her heart racing. She looked around, but none of her co-workers had noticed the ghostly visitor. She was alone in her terror. Desperate for answers, Mina decided to visit the town library after her shift. She knew she needed to understand the factory's past if she was going to make sense of what she had seen. She hoped that somewhere in the dusty old records, she would find a clue about the woman and the terrible events that had scarred the factory. The library was a quiet, imposing building filled with the musty scent of old books. Mina approached the elderly librarian, Mrs. Green, who was known for her vast knowledge of the town's history. "Excuse me, Mrs. Green," Mina began, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm looking for information on the Monahan textile factory, specifically about the fire that happened there in 1923. Mrs. Green peered at Mina over her glasses, her eyes sharp and inquisitive. "Ah, the Monahan fire. A tragic event. Many lives lost. What brings you to research such a grim topic, dear?" Mina hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "I've been working there, and strange things have been happening. I think it might be connected to what happened back then." Mrs. Green nodded knowingly. "Many have spoken of the factory being haunted. Follow me. I'll show you the archives." Mina followed the librarian to a dusty corner of the library where old newspapers and records were stored. Mrs. Green pulled out a large, leather-bound volume and laid it on the table. "This contains articles from the time of the fire," she said, opening the book to a specific page. "You might find what you're looking for here." Mina sat down and began to read. The articles detailed the horrific fire, the screams of the trapped workers, and the heroic efforts of those who tried to save them. One article caught her eye, a report about a woman named Eleanor, a young seamstress who had been working the night of the fire. Eleanor had been among those who perished. Her body never recovered. The more Mina read, the more she felt a connection to Eleanor. The description of the young seamstress matched the ghostly figure she had seen. Eleanor's story was a tragic one. She had been newly married, her husband away at war, and she had taken the night shift to make ends meet. Mina felt a pang of sadness and a growing determination. She had to uncover the truth about what happened to Eleanor and the other workers. She photocopied the relevant articles and headed home, her mind racing with thoughts of the past and the specter she had seen. The next night at the factory, Mina shared her findings with Tom. He listened intently, his face growing more serious with each revelation. "We need to find out more," Tom said. "There's something they're trying to tell us." That night, as they worked side by side, Mina saw the apparition again. This time, Eleanor seemed to be pointing towards a corner of the room. Mina nudged Tom and gestured towards the ghostly figure. Tom nodded, his eyes wide with fear and determination. They waited until the shift ended and the factory was empty. Armed with flashlights, they followed the direction Eleanor had pointed. It led them to a storage room they hadn't noticed before, its door rusted and partially hidden behind a stack of old crates. Tom forced the door open and they stepped inside. The room was filled with old records, photographs, and ledgers. It was as if time had stood still. Mina's eyes fell on a stack of charred papers on a desk in the corner. She picked them up, her hands trembling. "These are payroll records," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Look at the dates. These are from the week before the fire." Tom sifted through the documents, his face growing darker with each page. "There are discrepancies here. Names of workers who weren't supposed to be on duty that night. And look at these payments. Hush money, I'd bet." Mina's eyes widened. "You think the fire was deliberate? That they covered it up?" Tom nodded grimly. "It's starting to look that way. We need to get this to the authorities." As they left the storage room, the factory seemed to groan around them, the whispers louder than ever. The shadows stretched and twisted, but Mina felt a newfound resolve. She knew now that the apparitions were not there to harm them. They were seeking justice, trying to reveal the truth. As they stepped out into the night, the ghostly figure of Eleanor appeared once more. This time she looked at Mina with a hint of a smile, a silent thank you for uncovering her story. Mina nodded in acknowledgement, determined to see this through to the end. The past was no longer just a distant memory. It was a living, breathing force demanding to be heard, and Mina and Tom were its unwilling messengers, drawn into a century-old tragedy that refused to be forgotten. The next day, the factory buzzed with unease. Whispers of the previous night's events spread among the workers, and an air of palpable fear settled over the factory floor. Tom and Mina kept their findings to themselves for the time being, deciding to gather more evidence before confronting the factory's management. As night fell, Tom and Mina returned to the factory, their nerves taut with anticipation. The whispers seemed louder, and the shadows moved with a more deliberate purpose. It was as if the factory itself was aware of their intentions and was either warning them or urging them on. Mina's eyes darted around the dimly lit room as she worked, half expecting to see Eleanor's ghostly form at any moment. She could feel the weight of the spirits pressing down on her, their collective sorrow and rage almost tangible. Tom felt it too, a sense of being watched, judged by unseen eyes. Halfway through the night, Mina discovered the first message. She had gone to retrieve some fabric from a storage closet when she noticed words scrawled in soot on the wall. The message was brief but chilling. "Leave or die." Mina gasped and called Tom over. He examined the message, his face set in grim determination. "They're trying to scare us off," he said, "but we can't stop now. We're too close to the truth." The messages became more frequent as the night wore on. More words appeared, each one more menacing than the last. "Fire comes. They lied. Blood will spill." The factory's oppressive atmosphere grew heavier, the air thick with foreboding. Around midnight, the power suddenly went out, plunging the factory into darkness. The workers cried out in fear, their voices echoing in the pitch-black space. Tom fumbled for his flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. "Everyone stay calm," Tom shouted. "We need to find the backup generator." Mina and Tom led the way, their flashlights flickering as they moved through the factory. The whispers grew louder in the darkness, a cacophony of voices overlapping, pleading and warning. Mina's heart raced as she caught glimpses of ghostly figures flitting in and out of the shadows. They reached the generator room and Tom quickly set to work, his hands trembling as he tried to restart the power. Mina stood guard, her eyes scanning the darkened room. That's when she saw it. A ghostly figure standing in the corner, its form faint but unmistakable. It wasn't Eleanor this time. It was a man, his face twisted in pain and anger. The apparition pointed towards a metal cabinet against the wall. Mina hesitated, then slowly approached it. She pulled open the door and found a stack of old documents, their edges singed and brittle. She picked them up and quickly scanned the contents. "Tom, look at this," she said, her voice shaking. "These are maintenance records. They show that the fire suppression system was deliberately disabled the night of the fire." Tom looked up from the generator, his eyes widening. "That's it. That's the proof we need." Just then, the power came back on, the lights flickering to life. The workers breathed a collective sigh of relief, but the factory's oppressive atmosphere remained. The whispers were still there, quieter now, but ever present. Mina and Tom knew they had to act quickly. They gathered the documents and made their way to the factory's main office. They needed to confront Victor Hall and demand an explanation. As they walked through the factory, more messages appeared on the walls, urging them to hurry. "Truth will out. Justice now. Find the others." The factory seemed to pulse with a desperate energy, the spirits growing more agitated. They reached the office and found Victor Hall sitting behind his desk, looking up in surprise as they burst in. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. Tom slammed the documents onto the desk. "These are maintenance records from the night of the fire. They show that the fire suppression system was disabled. You knew about this, didn't you?" Victor's face went pale, but he quickly recovered. "That's ridiculous. These documents prove nothing." Mina stepped forward, her eyes blazing with determination. "We've seen the ghosts of the workers who died that night. They're trying to tell us something, to reveal the truth. You can't hide it anymore." Victor's composure cracked, and he slumped back in his chair. "Fine. You're right. My grandfather was the owner at the time. He knew about the faulty wiring, but fixing it would have cost too much. They disabled the fire suppression system to save money, and when the fire started, it was too late." Mina and Tom exchanged a glance, their suspicions confirmed. The whispers grew louder, almost triumphant. The truth was finally out. Victor looked defeated. "What do you want from me?" Tom's face hardened. "You need to come clean. Admit what happened and make amends to the families of those who died. Only then can the spirits find peace." Victor nodded, his face ashen. "I'll do it. I'll call a press conference tomorrow and tell the truth." As Tom and Mina left the office, the factory seemed to sigh with relief. The whispers faded and the shadows receded. They knew their journey wasn't over, but they had taken a crucial step towards uncovering the truth and bringing justice to the lost souls of the Monahan textile factory. The night shift continued, but the oppressive atmosphere had lifted slightly. The workers moved with renewed purpose, no longer just laboring under the weight of the past, but working towards a brighter future. Mina glanced around the factory one last time before heading home. The ghostly figures were still there, watching, waiting. But now, she felt a sense of hope. The past was finally beginning to be acknowledged, and the spirits of the factory would soon find the peace they had been denied for so long. Tom Edwards tossed and turned in his bed, his sleep fitful and disturbed. Images of the factory, the ghostly apparitions, and the ominous messages haunted his dreams. He saw Eleanor's tortured face, the flickering shadows, and the walls closing in on him. Each time he awoke, drenched in sweat, the whispers seemed to follow him, echoing in the corners of his mind. As the days passed, the pressure of what he had uncovered weighed heavily on him. The factory was not just a place of work anymore. It was a living nightmare. His sanity began to unravel, the boundaries between reality and the supernatural blurring. The more he tried to make sense of it all, the more the darkness seeped into his soul. One evening, after another exhausting shift, Tom sat in his small apartment, the dim light of his desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls. He had spread out the documents they had found, desperately trying to piece together the full story. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hands trembled with fatigue and anxiety. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his daze. It was Mina. "Tom, are you okay?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Tom rubbed his temples, trying to clear the fog from his mind. "I don't know, Mina. I can't shake these visions. The whispers. They're everywhere." "You're not alone," Mina said softly. "I've been hearing them too. We need to stay focused, Tom. We're so close to uncovering the full truth." Tom sighed. "I know, but it's getting harder to tell what's real. I feel like I'm losing my mind." "Meet me at the library tomorrow," Mina said. "We'll go through the records again. Maybe there's something we missed." Tom agreed, though he doubted they would find anything new. The weight of the past was crushing him, and he felt like he was drowning in a sea of despair. The next day, they met at the library, the oppressive atmosphere of the factory still clinging to them like a second skin. Mrs. Green greeted them with a sympathetic smile and led them to the archives. They spent hours sifting through old newspapers, letters, and photographs, hoping to find a clue that would help them put the restless spirits to rest. As the afternoon wore on, Tom's exhaustion deepened. He felt a presence beside him, and when he looked up, he saw Eleanor standing there, her eyes filled with sorrow. He blinked and she was gone, but the chill remained. Mina noticed his distraction. "Tom, are you seeing something?" Tom nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "Eleanor, she's here." Mina's eyes widened. "What did she look like?" "Sad," Tom said. "She looked sad and resigned." Mina reached out and squeezed his hand. "We're going to get through this. We just need to stay strong." Tom tried to take comfort in her words, but the darkness gnawing at his mind was relentless. They continued their search, and finally, Mina found something. A journal belonging to a man named Samuel Green, one of the factory workers who had survived the fire. The journal detailed the weeks leading up to the fire. Samuel had been suspicious of the factory's management, noting irregularities and unsafe practices. He had confronted the foreman, only to be threatened into silence. The final entry was written the night before the fire. "I fear for our safety. They're playing with fire, and we will all pay the price." Tom felt a shiver run down his spine. Samuel had known something was wrong, but he hadn't been able to stop it. The weight of the workers' fear and the betrayal of their trust were palpable in the journal's pages. "This is it," Tom said, his voice shaking. "We need to show this to Victor. He has to acknowledge what happened and make it right." Mina nodded. "Let's go. The sooner we confront him, the sooner we can bring peace to the spirits." As they left the library, Tom felt a renewed sense of purpose. The whispers seemed to recede, replaced by a steely determination. They were getting closer to the truth, and he was ready to face whatever came next. The drive to Victor Hall's office was tense, the weight of their discoveries pressing down on them. When they arrived, they found Victor pacing behind his desk, his face drawn with worry. "What now?" he demanded, his voice tinged with irritation and fear. Tom placed the journal on Victor's desk. "This belonged to Samuel Green, one of the workers who survived the fire. It details the unsafe practices and the threats he received. You need to read it." Victor hesitated, then opened the journal. As he read, his expression shifted from skepticism to horror. He looked up, his face pale. "I had no idea," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "My grandfather, he was a monster." Tom stepped forward. "You need to make this right. The spirits of those workers are still here, trapped and suffering. You have to acknowledge what happened and take responsibility." Victor nodded slowly. "I will. I'll hold a press conference and tell the truth. I'll do whatever it takes to make amends." Tom and Mina exchanged a relieved glance. It wasn't over yet, but they were one step closer to bringing peace to the haunted factory. That night, as Tom lay in bed, the whispers were quieter, almost gentle. He closed his eyes, hoping that he would finally get some rest. But deep down, he knew that the journey was far from over. The past had a way of clinging to the present, and the shadows in his mind would not easily let go. The following day, the factory was abuzz with rumors. Word had spread that Victor Hall planned to hold a press conference to reveal the truth about the fire and the factory's dark history. The workers were on edge, both hopeful and fearful of what the revelations might bring. Tom and Mina arrived early, their resolve strengthened by their discoveries and Victor's promise to make things right. As the day wore on, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something they were missing. The whispers had become a constant presence, a haunting reminder that the spirits of the factory were not yet at peace. He confided in Mina, who suggested they take another look around the factory, hoping to uncover any last hidden secrets. They started with the areas they had already explored, checking for anything they might have overlooked. The factory's labyrinthine layout made it easy to miss things, and they moved cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the dim light. As they made their way through the basement, Tom noticed something odd, a section of the wall that looked newer than the rest. "Mina, look at this," Tom said, pointing to the wall. Mina inspected it closely. "It looks like it was patched up recently. Do you think there's something behind it?" Tom nodded. "Only one way to find out." They found a crowbar and pried at the edges of the wall. The plaster crumbled away, revealing a hidden door. Tom's heart raced as he forced it open, the old hinges creaking ominously. Beyond the door was a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. "This must be the locked room," Mina whispered, her voice tinged with both excitement and fear. They descended the stairs, their flashlights flickering as they went deeper. The air grew colder, and the whispers louder, guiding them onward. At the bottom of the stairs, they found another door, this one made of heavy iron. It took all of Tom's strength to push it open. The room beyond was small and cramped, filled with old records, photographs, and ledgers. It was clear that this was where the factory's darkest secrets had been hidden. Tom and Mina began sifting through the documents, their eyes widening as they uncovered more evidence of corruption and deceit. "This is it," Mina said, holding up a photograph. "Look, it's Eleanor, and these must be the other workers who died in the fire." The photograph showed a group of workers, their faces somber and weary. Tom recognized Eleanor immediately, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. He felt a pang of sorrow, knowing how her life had ended. Mina continued to sort through the papers. "There are letters here too, from the workers to the management, begging for better conditions. And look at this. It's a letter from Samuel Green, warning about the fire hazards." Tom's hands trembled as he read the letter. It was a final, desperate plea for help, written just days before the fire. The pain and fear in Samuel's words were palpable, and Tom felt a surge of anger at the callousness of the factory's owners. "This is more than enough evidence," Tom said. "Victor needs to see this. The whole town needs to see this." They gathered the documents and photographs, carefully packing them into a box. As they prepared to leave, Mina noticed something else, an old, leather-bound diary tucked away in a corner. She opened it and began to read, her eyes widening with each page. "Tom, this is Eleanor's diary," she said, her voice trembling. She wrote about the conditions in the factory, the fear they all felt. And there's something else. Tom leaned in, his curiosity piqued. "What is it?" Mina turned to the final entry. "It's dated to the night of the fire. She wrote about seeing something strange, a figure in the shadows just before the fire started. She thought it was a warning, a sign that something terrible was about to happen." Tom felt a chill run down his spine. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they formed was more terrifying than he had imagined. The spirits in the factory were not just restless. They had been trying to warn the workers, to prevent the tragedy that had claimed so many lives. "We need to get this to Victor," Tom said, his voice filled with urgency. "He needs to know everything." They made their way back to the main floor, their minds racing with the implications of what they had found. As they approached Victor's office, the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. Tom and Mina exchanged a determined glance and knocked on the door. Victor opened it, his face pale and drawn. "What now?" he asked, his voice weary. "We found more evidence," Tom said, holding up the box. "You need to see this." Victor let them in, and they spread the documents and photographs across his desk. As he read through the letters and looked at the pictures, his expression shifted from disbelief to horror. This is beyond anything I imagined," Victor said, his voice shaking. "My grandfather, he was responsible for all of this." Tom placed Eleanor's diary in front of Victor. "Read the last entry. She saw something that night, something that warned her about the fire." Victor read the diary entry, his hands trembling. This changes everything. I have to come clean. The town deserves to know the truth." As Victor prepared for the press conference, Tom and Mina felt a sense of relief. They had uncovered the factory's darkest secrets, and now justice would finally be served. The spirits of the Monaghan textile factory could find peace, and the workers could move forward without the weight of the past bearing down on them. That night, as Tom and Mina stood outside the factory, they saw the ghostly figures of Eleanor and the other workers. They watched in silence as the apparitions slowly faded away, their expressions peaceful at last. The past had finally been acknowledged, and the factory's haunting echoes began to fade. Tom knew that the journey was not over, but for the first time he felt a glimmer of hope. The shadows in the machinery were no longer a source of fear, but a reminder of the resilience and strength of those who had come before. Victor Hall stood at the podium, the weight of his family's sins pressing down on him as he faced the sea of curious and anxious faces. The press conference had drawn a crowd, with townspeople, journalists, and the factory workers all eager to hear what he had to say. Tom and Mina stood at the back, watching intently, the box of documents at their feet. Victor cleared his throat, his voice trembling as he began. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you today to reveal the truth about the Monaghan textile factory and the tragedy that occurred here nearly a century ago. He proceeded to outline the findings, recounting the horrors of the fire, the negligence of the factory owners, and the cover-up that had followed. As he spoke, gasps and murmurs of shock rippled through the crowd. Victor's confession was a catharsis for the town, a long overdue acknowledgement of the past. As Victor concluded his speech, he looked directly at Tom and Mina. These brave individuals uncovered the truth and brought it to light. They have given a voice to those who were silenced for far too long. The crowd erupted into applause, and Tom felt a surge of relief. But as the applause died down, a cold breeze swept through the assembly. The whispers returned, louder than ever, and the temperature dropped dramatically. The ghostly figures of Eleanor and the other workers materialized, their faces etched with pain and anger. The crowd gasped and backed away, fear gripping their hearts. Victor stood frozen, his eyes wide with terror as he faced the specters of his family's past misdeeds. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice echoing like a mournful wail. The truth is out, but justice has not been served. Tom and Mina exchanged a worried glance. They had hoped the confession would bring peace, but the spirits were not yet satisfied. The restless dead demanded more than just acknowledgement. They wanted retribution. Suddenly, the spirits turned their attention to the factory's current management. John Perkins, a descendant of one of the original owners and now part of the factory's board, began to tremble. The ghosts closed in on him, their eyes burning with rage. "Your family profited from our suffering," Eleanor intoned. "You will pay for their crimes." John's face turned ashen as the spirits surrounded him. The crowd watched in horrified fascination as the ghostly figures reached out, their hands passing through John's body. He let out a blood-curdling scream and collapsed to the ground, convulsing as if an invisible force was tearing him apart. Tom and Mina rushed forward, but there was nothing they could do. John's body went limp, and the spirits withdrew, their anger seemingly appeased. Eleanor looked at Tom and Mina, her expression softening. "Thank you," she whispered. "But our justice is not yet complete. Those who benefited from our suffering must all be held accountable." Tom's heart sank. He knew that the factory's board was filled with descendants of the original owners. The spirits would not rest until every one of them faced retribution. In the following days, the town was gripped by fear. One by one, the descendants of the factory's original owners met gruesome fates. Each death mirrored the manner in which the workers had perished in the fire: burns, crushing injuries, and suffocation. The spirits were exacting their vengeance with a relentless fury. Tom and Mina tried to help, but there was little they could do against the supernatural forces at work. The factory's board members were either too stubborn to believe in the hauntings or too terrified to act. As the death toll rose, the town's fear turned to anger. They demanded that the factory be shut down and demolished to put an end to the curse. Victor Hall, now a pariah in the community, reluctantly agreed. He announced the closure of the factory and promised to turn the land into a memorial for the workers who had died. It was a small gesture, but it was the only way to appease the spirits and bring peace to the town. On the day of the demolition, Tom and Mina stood with the townspeople, watching as the wrecking ball swung into action. The factory's walls crumbled, and the ground shook as the building came down. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices rising to a crescendo, then abruptly falling silent as the last wall fell. In the rubble, Tom saw Eleanor one final time. She stood among the ruins, her face serene and at peace. She nodded to him, a silent thank you, before fading away, taking the other spirits with her. The town breathed a collective sigh of relief. The curse had been lifted, and the factory's dark legacy was finally laid to rest. Tom and Mina knew that the past would never be forgotten, but they hoped that the future would be brighter. As they walked away from the ruins, Tom felt a sense of closure. The shadows in the machinery had been exorcised, and the ghosts of the past had found their justice. The Monahan textile factory was no more, but its story would live on, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of truth. For Tom and Mina, it was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger for it. And as they looked toward the future, they knew they could face whatever challenges came their way, together. The Monahan textile factory lay in ruins, a somber memorial to the tragedy that had befallen its workers. Yet, the town remained on edge. The recent deaths of the factory's board members had left a lingering sense of dread, and whispers of a curse persisted. Tom and Mina knew that although the factory was gone, their fight was far from over. The spirits had exacted their vengeance, but their restlessness hinted that more secrets lay buried. One evening, as Tom and Mina were sifting through the last of the factory's records in the town hall, they stumbled upon a set of blueprints for the factory. Among the schematics, they noticed something unusual, a sub-basement that wasn't on any of the maps they had previously seen. "We missed this," Tom said, his finger tracing the outline of the hidden level. "Whatever's down there might be the key to finally putting this to rest." Mina nodded. "We need to get in there. Maybe there's something that can help us understand why the spirits are still restless." The next day, they obtained permission from the town council to explore the ruins. Equipped with flashlights and tools, they made their way to the factory's remains. The entrance to the sub-basement was hidden beneath a pile of rubble, but after hours of digging, they uncovered a rusted metal door. Tom pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading into darkness. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. As they descended, the temperature dropped, and the whispers returned, louder and more urgent. At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a cavernous room. Old, broken machinery lined the walls, and the floor was littered with debris. In the center of the room stood a large iron safe. Tom approached it cautiously, his flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. "This must be it," Tom said. "Whatever's in this safe might be the final piece of the puzzle." Mina examined the lock. "It's old, but I think I can open it." After several tense minutes, Mina managed to unlock the safe. Inside, they found stacks of documents, ledgers, and photographs. As they sifted through the contents, a chilling realization dawned on them. "These are records of payments," Mina said, holding up a ledger. "Bribes, payoffs to keep people quiet about the factory's conditions. And look at this. There are letters here from government officials, all turning a blind eye to the violations." Tom's face darkened. "This goes deeper than we thought. It wasn't just the factory owners. There were people in power who knew and did nothing." Among the documents, they found a journal belonging to Victor Hall's grandfather, detailing his involvement in the cover-up. The final entry was the most disturbing. "The fire was necessary to cleanse the factory of its secrets. The sacrifices made will ensure our prosperity." The room seemed to grow colder, and the whispers intensified, swirling around them like a storm. Tom and Mina exchanged a glance, realizing that they had uncovered the true horror. The fire had been deliberately set, not just to save money, but as a calculated act to bury the factory's darkest secrets. "This is why the spirits can't rest," Mina said, her voice shaking. "They were murdered to protect the greed and corruption of a few powerful men." Tom nodded, his resolve hardening. "We need to expose this. The town needs to know the full truth." They gathered the documents and made their way back to the surface. As they emerged into the fading light, they felt a renewed sense of purpose. They would not let the spirit's suffering be in vain. The next day, they presented their findings to the town council and the local press. The revelations shocked the community, and an outcry for justice swept through the town. Victor Hall, already disgraced, pledged to assist in any way he could to bring those involved to justice. But as night fell, the spirit's presence grew stronger, their whispers now a constant, haunting chorus. Tom and Mina realized they needed to do more than just expose the truth. They needed to confront the spirits directly, to offer them a chance at peace. They gathered a group of the town's most respected citizens, including members of the clergy, and returned to the ruins of the factory. Under the pale moonlight, they held a seance, hoping to communicate with the restless souls. The air grew colder, and the spirits began to materialize, their forms flickering in the moonlight. Eleanor stepped forward, her eyes filled with an ancient sorrow. "We have exposed the truth," Tom said, his voice steady. "The town knows what happened to you. Justice will be served." Eleanor's gaze softened, but the pain remained. "We have waited so long," she whispered. "But there is one more thing. The man who ordered the fire, who ensured our deaths, is still here." Tom's heart raced. "Who is it?" Eleanor pointed towards the town's oldest mansion on the hill, a place long abandoned. "He resides there, his soul as restless as ours. He must be confronted, and his crimes laid bare." Tom and Mina knew what they had to do. They gathered their courage and, with the town's support, made their way to the mansion. The air grew colder with each step, the whispers guiding them forward. Inside the decaying mansion, they found a hidden room, much like the one in the factory. There, sitting in an old armchair, was the ghostly figure of Victor Hall's grandfather. His eyes burned with a malevolent light, and his presence radiated a chilling hatred. "You've come to end it," he said, his voice echoing with the sinister timbre. Tom stepped forward. "Your time is over. The truth is known, and justice will be served." The ghost let out a terrible scream, the walls shaking with his fury. But as the townspeople recited prayers and offered words of peace, his form began to waver, the darkness surrounding him dissipating. With one final, agonized wail, the spirit of Victor Hall's grandfather vanished, leaving behind a palpable silence. The oppressive weight lifted, and the whispers ceased. The town breathed a collective sigh of relief. The spirits of the factory workers, including Eleanor, appeared one last time, their faces serene and at peace. They nodded in gratitude before fading away, finally free. Tom and Mina stood together, the weight of their journey lifting. The haunted factory was no more, its dark legacy exorcised. The town could heal, and the spirits could rest. As dawn broke, Tom and Mina knew their lives would never be the same. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, their bond forged in the fires of their ordeal. The future was uncertain, but they would face it together, ready for whatever came next. The town of Monaghan had been forever changed by the revelations about the factory, and though the spirits had been laid to rest, a lingering unease remained. Tom and Mina had become local heroes, but they knew that the fight was not entirely over. The mansion where they had confronted the spirit of Victor Hall's grandfather still held a dark presence, and they feared it might be a focal point for future unrest. One evening, as Tom and Mina were discussing the next steps at Tom's apartment, Mina received a frantic call from Victor Hall. His voice was shaking, almost hysterical. "Tom, Mina, you need to come to the mansion immediately," Victor pleaded. "There's something happening. Something terrible." They rushed to the mansion, the air growing colder as they approached. A crowd had gathered outside, whispering anxiously. The mansion loomed ominously, its windows dark and uninviting. As they entered, they felt an oppressive weight, the atmosphere thick with a sense of impending doom. Victor met them in the foyer, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. "It's back," he said, his voice trembling. "The darkness, it's returned." Tom and Mina exchanged a worried glance. They had thought the spirits were at peace, but clearly, something had reawakened the malevolent force within the mansion. They knew they had to act quickly to prevent more deaths. "We need to find the source," Tom said, his voice resolute. "Whatever's causing this, it's still here." They moved cautiously through the mansion, flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. The deeper they went, the colder it became. The whispers returned, now more frantic and disjointed, echoing through the empty halls. In the basement, they found a hidden passage leading to a room that wasn't on any of the blueprints. The air inside was frigid, and the walls were lined with strange symbols and markings. At the center of the room stood an altar, upon which lay an old, leather-bound book. "This must be it," Mina said, her voice barely a whisper. "The source of the darkness." Tom approached the altar cautiously, his flashlight illuminating the book. The pages were filled with arcane symbols and incantations, remnants of a dark ritual. As he reached out to touch the book, the room shook violently and a deep, guttural voice echoed around them. "You cannot stop what has been set in motion," the voice intoned. "The curse will consume you all." The walls began to close in, the darkness pressing down on them. Tom grabbed the book and backed away, his mind racing. "We need to destroy this," he said. "It's the only way to break the curse." They ran up the stairs, the mansion shaking with each step. As they reached the foyer, they saw ghostly figures materializing, their faces twisted in pain and anger. The spirits of the factory workers were back, but now they seemed to be consumed by the same malevolent force that had driven Victor Hall's grandfather. "We need to get out of here," Mina shouted. They fled the mansion, the ground shaking beneath their feet. Outside, the crowd watched in horror as the building seemed to pulse with dark energy. Tom and Mina knew they had to act fast. They ran to the town square where they had gathered the townspeople earlier for the seance. "We need to destroy this book," Tom announced, holding it up. "It's the source of the curse. We need to burn it." A bonfire was quickly assembled, and Tom threw the book into the flames. The fire roared to life, and the book began to burn, its pages curling and blackening. As the book was consumed, the ground stopped shaking, and the oppressive darkness began to lift. The ghostly figures that had followed them from the mansion appeared one last time, their forms flickering in the firelight. Eleanor stepped forward, her eyes filled with a sorrowful gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "The darkness is gone. We can finally rest." The spirits slowly faded away, their forms dissolving into the night. The crowd watched in awe and relief, knowing that the curse had finally been broken. Tom and Mina stood together, their hands clasped tightly. They had faced unimaginable horrors, but they had triumphed. The town of Monaghan could finally begin to heal, free from the shadows of its past. As dawn broke over the town, Tom and Mina knew that their lives would never be the same. They had forged a bond stronger than steel, tempered by their shared ordeal. The future was uncertain, but they were ready to face it together, knowing that they had the strength to overcome anything. The Monaghan textile factory and its dark legacy had been laid to rest, but the story of Tom and Mina was just beginning. They looked towards the horizon, ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead, their hearts filled with hope and determination. The past had been exorcised, and the future was theirs to shape.